Welcome to this edition to The Voice of Diaspora. We're lucky enough to have a very special guest with us today, the founder and chair of one of our associations, one of our CTCA associations, Mustafa Kureyşi, the head of the Cezire Association. Welcome, Mustafa.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
It's really great to have you on today. We're going to talk about your organisation, some of the work you've been doing, and also an area that's of particular interest to me, which is your support for the plight of the Chinese Uyghur people that who've been featured very heavily in the press and on TV in the last couple of months. Let's start by asking about the foundation, the association, when you set it up, what your aims were, what your ambitions are. If you could tell us something about the background.
Yeah, sure. So as a Turkish Cypriot who feels very passionately about our identity, particularly in the field of history and heritage, it was often frustrating to come across many Western academic works written primarily by Orientalists, misrepresenting or falsifying our history in many ways. Things like Sultan Selim II conquered Cyprus because of his love of wine, Cypriot wine, as if he didn't have enough money to purchase the wine himself. And 50,000 plus martyred, and God knows how much was spent to capture Cyprus, all because of wine. It doesn't make sense. Or that the first Muslims to have opened Cyprus were pirates or raiders. And this is an absolute insult to our predecessors. The fact of the matter is that when we look at the primary sources, be it in Arabic or in Ottoman Turkish, we find out that it's actually quite the opposite, that these are honoured predecessors and they deserve our utmost respect. But unfortunately it seemed as though, due to maybe because we've changed from our classical script to the Latin script, or maybe because of a lack of interest to actually put the work in, I found that even Turkish historians today are wholeheartedly accepting the narrative by these Orientalists and translating these works and these sources into Turkish. And as a result, in 2008 in London, Ertan Karpazlı and I, my friend, we just thought, you know what, we need to actually research from these primary sources, put it out there, put the Turkish Cypriot narrative out there as well in the academic field. So we founded, and we've had a number of Turkish Cypriots join us throughout the years. Initially we was called Kıbrıs Türk Mirasına Hizmet Derneği. It's quite a long name and no one could really remember the name. So the team and I decided that we need to change the name, something shorter, something that actually was symbolic and was in line with our aims and objectives. And as such we came up with the name Cezire. And Cezire in Ottoman Turkish means island.
Okay.
So you'd come with the sources Cezire Kıbrıs, Kıbrıs Ceziresi. So Cezire Derneği was quite fitting, and since then we've been really active, not only in London, but we've gone abroad as well, be it Cyprus and even Bosnia, Western Thrace, and such as well.
Really interesting. So you talked about going back to primary sources because all the secondary evidence and all the secondary sources were skewed by a perspective that really didn't fit with what you believed or thought might be the case. How did you go about identifying those primary sources, accessing them and enabling that the information held in those sources to be unlocked?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just through, obviously at first, just by reading these things, some of the things didn't sound quite right. And eventually through reading other secondary sources, you start picking up information. But then I was quite fortunate enough to have the opportunity to join a number of Ottoman Turkish classes.
Were they here in
here?
the UK?
Yes, there was a number of classes at various places. Unfortunately, they only taught up to like a beginner intermediate level, and after that point I had to kind of self-teach myself. But thankfully we're living in an age where that is possible. And as an association, what we want to do is provide a service to the community. We realise that not everyone has the same motivation or has the time to actually start learning Ottoman, going to the primary sources. So it's something I'm passionate about, and I want to provide a service in which I'm able to decipher these sources and put it out there in a digestible format for our community and for others to look into as well. I've just brought some sources as well. As you can see, this is Turkish.
Yeah.
Here. This is an older one as well. So.
And what are these documents?
Okay, so this is Tuhfetül Kibar by Çelebi. This source is talking about the opening of Cyprus from the 1600s. And this is also regarding the same issue as well, but it's a later copy.
So this is written in Ottoman Turkish. Ottoman Turkish.
Yeah.
It's from the 1600s.
That's right.
So this would have been written after the Ottoman conquest, and it sort of describes the events
Yes.
that led up to the island being taken over by the Ottomans.
Absolutely. So the Cyprus was taken in 1571, so it was written soon after, and it explains things like, another misconception is that Lala Mustafa Pasha, he's the famous example of what happened with Marco Bragadino. Yeah. He tortured him, and he took his skin off, and all these kind of brutal acts, which is true. And if we take a nuanced approach, we can say that he would have taken things to an extreme. We can say, and even Ottoman historians have said that he took things too far. However, what's lacking in the Western sources is the motivation. So they agreed as part of when the Ottomans took Famagusta, part of the agreement was that the Venetians would give back the Muslim captives, and they had agreed to that. And what Marco Bragadino did was he killed all of them. Oh. And that was the motivation. Again, that's lacking, and it's only by going to the primary sources where you can see that there. But by doing this, we try, as I said, I want to make it digestible for our audience. So we try to take an academic approach rather than the old kind of cliched flag waving and all this kind of nationalistic rhetoric that our people don't really latch onto anymore. I think we've as a community become a lot more mature in the kind of information that we want to take on board, not just like rhetoric that doesn't really mean much anymore.
That can be quite sensationalist.
Exactly.
That serves for political ends. This is documenting in its original form, in a language that we can digest and understand today, those sources which wouldn't be available to us otherwise. So are you working with academic institutions, with universities? How is your work sort of, being shared in the wider world? Of course, this is of great interest to our community, but I imagine this will be interesting to lots of academics. Institutions like SOAS might be interested in some of the work you're doing. Are you working with any academic institutions at the moment?
We are looking to, in the future, what we've had to do is, over the years, is we've had to start building a name for ourselves, get ourselves out there. So we've had a number of seminars over the years, we've attended cultural festivals, I've written a number of articles as well regarding an introduction to Turkish Cypriot history, even about Turks in London. So we're just trying to get the attention of the community.
And actually build a chronology and a repository of information.
Absolutely,
that can be shared.
Through different mediums as well. So we have an active social media account on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube as well. We have a channel there. I've interviewed a number of key stakeholders to do with our culture and history. So, for example, in terms of academia, Mustafa Hashim Altan, who is a very famous historian in Cyprus, he was the founder of the archives in Kirinya. I interviewed him as a 3-part series on our YouTube channel. Mehmet Ertuğ, who's the last Karagöz puppeteer, I've interviewed him as well, and he explains things. So we're getting these primary sources out there. It's on YouTube, so it's easy to digest for people now. So the next level now, we're looking at starting to go to more mainstream academic institutions. So that is in the process. Hopefully, SOAS, as you mentioned, is something we're looking to get into. However, we're trying to confirm someone who's actually studying there, because it's by invitation, in which you can go there. But ultimately, I want to focus on Turkish Cypriots first. Yeah. Those are my key market. Secondary is everyone else for me.
So how does the work that you're doing and all this research and everything that you've learned, how are you bringing that to the Turkish Cypriot English-speaking world? Obviously here and also in the States, in Australia, we have a huge community. The work that you're doing will be easily sort of transportable, translatable, and relevant to those groups as well. How can people access the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we try to get a good mix of through the various mediums that we promote our work is in either English or Turkish, and that way we can get the Turks in Cyprus, but also in the global diaspora as well. But in terms of our seminars, it's always been in English, And in fact, this has been, I feel that in some way we've been spearheading this movement, because when we had our first seminar, it was regarding the Turkish Cypriots that supported the Turkish War of Independence, and it was in English. It was in the 100th year of the Çanakkale War, and we actually had a member of the audience from our more elderly members of the community. He said, "Why are you guys speaking in English? This is an absolute, this is a disgrace. You should be speaking in Turkish." And our response to that is, I totally appreciate where you're coming from, because traditionally that's how we have been promoting ourselves for the last 30, 40 years living in the UK. But by doing so, we've disenfranchised a whole generation of Turkish Cypriots and members of other communities. And in fact, at that in the audience ourselves, we had many youngsters who maybe can speak Turkish, but at a basic level. We had members of the audience who were Algerian. We had a Portuguese lady that came along, and there were even Irish sisters that came there as well. And don't forget, it's going on YouTube as well. So there's so many people who'll be able to now access that information, who had it been in Turkish, we would have had the same people in the same kind of
And we'd be talking
circles.
to ourselves, and this is a real problem, because we're very good at talking to ourselves in our own language and telling our own truth. And because of some of the injustices and misreporting of Turkish Cypriot history, especially since the 1950s, there's been a phrase that summarises this attitude of, and in Turkish it's like "boş ver biz doğruyu biliriz," don't worry about them, we know the truth. But the work that you're doing, and especially making it accessible in English, actually unlocks that and makes that truth available to the English-speaking world. And it's like it or not, it's the language of business, it's the language of academia, and it's really important that we make all of these sources and all this information available in a language which brings our story to the wider world. So I'm wholeheartedly supporting the push to communicate in English, this really important work you're doing. Do you have any publications or reports or academic papers that anyone who's watching can access?
There is a website called Academia. It is academia.org. I have a profile on there, and people can download some of my academic work from the articles I've written for newspapers and magazines and such. There's also the videos on the YouTube channel. So if you just search my name on that website, academia.org, you can find it on there. However, the last seminar that we presented in February regarding the precursors of the Turks of Cyprus, that was actually, the idea came about because I'm actually working on a book regarding that subject area. I'm on like page 161 now. So hopefully when that comes out, then it will be something which mainstream academia can actually reference to as well. And all the sources are there in the footnotes. So that's my main focus in pushing that.
So I was going to ask you later, but I will ask you now since you've mentioned it. I actually attended one of your talks on the precursors to the Ottoman Turks and the Islamic history, if you like, of Cyprus. And it was a really interesting and really informative. I had no idea that you had all of these Levantine occupants of Cyprus, many of whom were from what are now Muslim territories, who were the original and some of the first occupants of the island. Could you give us a brief? I know it's ambitious to try and ask you to recount a 2-hour talk in 5 minutes, but can you give us the kind of a top line of what you found in that research?
Yeah, of course. That was just a small sample. And it was like a 2-hour talk, but it was just a small sample of the information that we found. It was mainly to talk about, rather than this narrative that we're pushing, it's always about the Cyprus conflict in modern era, 1974, or the Ottomans came in 1571, half a page, and then we go up to the Cyprus conflict. We're not doing ourselves justice. We need to look at our identity as a multi-layered. We have an ethnic background, which is Turkish, and we also have a Muslim identity. Now, being part of the Muslim civilization does not necessarily equate to being a Muslim. So a Greek Cypriot would have some level of association with a Muslim civilization because of their association with the Ottoman Empire. So often I feel that members of our community don't really struggle to grasp this concept, even though members of the English community understand this a lot better. They'll talk about the Muslim civilization, the arts and the heritage and such, and it's not seen as a spiritual topic. So by looking at it through that lens, we can see that when Islam was founded, and the Prophet of Islam, peace and blessings be upon him, actually had a dream and he predicted the conquest of Cyprus. And this was to come true. And the first people to go to Cyprus were the companions of the Prophet. And anyone who has access or is fortunate enough to read about these individuals, they will know that they were people of high morals. They were people who went there for a reason to spread the good news. And we were fortunate enough to have these people there, not only have them there, but many have been laid to rest there, most famous of which is Hala Sultan. And from there on, we've had the armies of from the Umayyads and the Abbasids who were actually living there, and there was actually evidence to show that there was coins minted with the word Kubrus, Cyprus, on there. And further to that, then we start seeing what they called the Mamluks, who are actually the Turkish dynasty from Egypt. They weren't Oghuz like us, they were Kipchak, and they were going there, and they actually took Cyprus and made it we could say a tributary of their country. But when they took Nicosia, they said that this is the land, this Nicosia is the city.
And what time is this? What sort of, in terms of the chronology of Cyprus? When you talk about the Egyptian Muslims taking Nicosia,
yes,
when would that have been?
So it's when we focus on, we would be familiar with like the Lusignans and the Venetians, the Latin era. That was during that period. So although the administration may not have been in the Muslims' hand, we were a key stakeholder. We were the owners, and they were governing it on behalf of the Sultan. And so when we look at this, the Cyprus trade, this Cyprus tepsi that we look at, even we are promoting this narrative where there's the Byzantines, the Venetians, and so on, and there's just a brief mention of the Turks there, and we have all this rich history, which means that we are deep-rooted in Cyprus. And although ethnically we can look at the Mamluks as Turks who were there, our spiritual predecessors, people who belong to the Muslim civilization, if we include them as well, then in total we have a 1400-year stake in Cyprus. Now, I'm not taking away Greek Cypriot or any other community's stake in Cyprus as well. We can share our experience of Cyprus. This isn't a conflict at all in that regards. But us as a community need to focus on our own history first of all.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if you've done a genealogy test, and actually when you speak to Turkish Cypriots who've actually undertaken one of the many commercially available DNA tests, which are very cheaply available now, which can give you a kind of a portal back into your ethnic makeup.
Yes.
Fascinating what you find, because I don't know if you've done it. I've done it, and I'm 60% Sardinian, and amazed that I'm not. I don't have Turkish roots. I'm also Iranian, but it says a lot also about the history of the people, the fact that it was it's a place where cultures collide.
Yes. That
you have the Middle Eastern, North African, the Mediterranean influences that all contribute to this unique makeup. And we were talking earlier about words in the Turkish language, which I thought might have been Greek, or they might have been old Ottoman Turkish, but the word piron, for example, is an old word that my relatives would use to mean fork. It's actually an Italian word, which says that there's actually such a rich history, which also makes up our ethnic background, that is, we have contributors like the Egyptians, like the Levantines, the Italians. So it's it almost seems unfair to demarcate ourselves as sort of pure mainland Turkish heritage, because the island itself has got a very unique makeup. Yeah. Out of interest, what was your ethnic makeup?
I had all sorts. There's Cypriot there now. I think it was about 10 or 15%. There's some Iranian in there as well. I don't know how they got in there, but that's quite interesting. It's pretty much all over the place. But I think just to clarify, a lot of people, it's become very trendy among the Cypriot community, but we seem to have this idea that the pure Turks are from Turkey because the country has named itself Turkey, right? And it's just not the reality of the situation. Turk is not a race, right? The Turks came from Central Asia. The Turks in Central Asia, and we'll be discussing the Uyghurs, for example, look physically very different from us, right? So what does it mean to be? It's an ethnicity. So our ancestors who continued that language and that heritage and that culture, they came and they mixed. So in Anatolia, for example, Turkey, they may have mixed with Anatolian Greeks, they may have mixed with Armenians, Kurds, Arabs, and so on. And this doesn't make them any less Turkish. the ancestors to Turkish Cypriots, yes, the ones who came may have been more pure stock, we can say maybe Turkmen, Yörük, but they're also mixed as well. So we have a different mixture, but the Anatolians, people from Turkey, are not purebred either. This idea that we have to have a certain amount, that all it means is a haplogroup, what they call, from Anatolia and the Caucasus, where they share similar haplogroups. So you could have a Pontus Greek or Kurd or Laz or Greek Christian who would share the same haplogroup as a Turk from Anatolia, but the Greek from Greece would have a different haplogroup from a Greek from Anatolia. So that's all it means there. So when we have these various different areas, it just means different regions that have mixed together. It doesn't make us any less Turkish, and it doesn't make the Anatolians any less Turkish.
It's a very broad church, for want of better words, being a Turk, and it actually encompasses many ethnic origins and tribes, as you've said, and in the next part of our interview we'll be talking about the Uyghurs, which is a particular area of interest of mine, and maybe you can talk to us more about some of the other tribes and the history of all of those Turkmen people, the Turkmen people that all contribute to our rich heritage. Mustafa, thank you very much. Mustafa, if we can carry on from where we left off, we was talking about ethnic Turkish communities and the fact that our Turkish global community looks so varied. You know, we are every shade of white and brown, and we are blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and we can even have a more oriental look. Can you tell us something about the journey of the Turkish people? It's a very crude and sweeping categorization, but we describe ourselves as Turks, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so I mean the Turks started off in kind of modern kind of Mongolia kind of area. They had a town which was like holy for them, Ötüken, which was there, and there was old empires which they shared with other races as well, the Xiongnu, and it was because of the Xiongnu a mixture of like Mongoloid and Turkish people, in which the Chinese actually built the Great Wall to keep them out. So they were in such a geographic location where there was different kind of races. There was Caucasoid people in that time, white people living in that area as well. So that's why when we started traveling west, all the way up to the Balkans, all the way to Cyprus, even all the way to Algeria, where there's ethnic Turks living there to this day. So you must imagine, I read somewhere, I can't recall what the book's name was, but the Turkish experience should be thought of as like a bus, for example. It starts off in one point, and you may have a number of people on that bus, and then by the time it gets to the end, each stop, someone gets off, someone gets on. But the bus is a Turk, right? And some people that got off, they may have gone on and become something else. But then you have other people that have joined that bus, and at the end of the journey, a percentage of the passengers would have been in the original stop, but you would have a whole lot of other people who are there, who are part of that Turkish bus now. So we just have to think of, I mean, there's races in the world. There's, like, we can say the white race, black race, what they call Mongoloid race, and so on. Turk is an ethnicity, not a race. Just English is an ethnicity, Greek is an ethnicity, it's not a race, it's not a racial classification. What makes our differences more unique is because we started in such an area which has a distinctive look, maybe more of a Mongoloid kind of appearance, but because of the vast journey that we took and the people that we mixed with, their differences in our outward appearance become a lot more apparent. So in the English experience, for example, we know that the English are an amalgamation of Germanic people. There were the Normans that came, Anglo-Saxons and so on, but because they were all kind of from the same area, it's very hard to distinguish them so much from other people in the area. So having someone with Mongoloid features such as the Kyrgyz and the Kazakh, and then you have in Turkey, I mean, from the east to west to all over Izmir, you have kind of more fair skin. You go to Urfa and they'll be maybe darker, but this is overgeneralization again. You can go to Bulgaria today and there are many Turks there. And it's quite interesting. In London, for example, you see many of the Bulgarian Turks that come, and some are very fair skinned, and there's others who are darker than me, and they're all speaking Turkish to each other. And we mentioned last episode about how people are taking the DNA test and whatnot. This is just haplogroups. This is racial features. But the Turkish ethnicity is Well, an ethnic group is having a shared culture, shared language, and being a member of that historic experience. And it could be a perceived experience. That's fine, as long as you see yourself belonging to that community. And that isn't unique just to the Turkish experience. The Greek Cypriots, for example, they are not racially from Greece, what we know of today.
Well, all of these races are constructs, and we use them in today to describe ourselves because it helps us to divide and categorise. But you're absolutely right.
Absolutely. So if we speak a little bit different from the way that Turks in Turkey do, we don't give the mantle to or the copyright of Turkishness to Turkey. Right? You have Azerbaijani Turks; they all speak in their flavour of Turkish, but they're not any less Turkish. So we just need to think of it in that kind of aspect. There have been a lot of games that have been played on our communities globally as Turks. So the Russians, for example, they worked very hard to work on the Turkestan, what they call Central Asian Turks, to divide them up. You're Kyrgyz, you're Kazakh, you're Uzbek, you're Uyghur. But the land itself is called Turkestan. And Istan is actually a Persian prefix there. Turkestan means land of the Turks. So all these Kazakh and Uyghur, this is all tribes. So at some point we would call ourselves, they would say that these are Ottoman Turks who belong to the Oğuz tribe. They are Turkmen. But we call ourselves Turk now because at one point Turkey was the only independent, free Turkish country in the world. So we need to kind of push beyond that now, where not everyone from Turkey is a Turk. And in once we start appreciating that, not only are we giving the rights to other communities in Turkey, but then we can accept other Turks who, what they say, dış Türkleri, they're outside the Turks, or the Turks from outside of Turkey. Then we can say, okay, these are Turks of a different variety.
Well, it's interesting you say that because very recently I've come to learn that the term Yahudi describes obviously people who are Jewish and of Jewish descent, but the word Musevi actually describes Ottoman Jews, so Jews who fled the Spanish Inquisition, who came to Turkey speaking a very, very unique language. It was a mix of
Ladino,
Spanish and Hebrew. And it's interesting now because you go to parts of Istanbul and that language is alive only now in Turkey, mainly in Istanbul. And the very open and welcoming sort of attitude of the Ottoman administration at the time allowed for the preservation of this very, very unique Spanish Hebrew culture. And those people still speak the language today, and it's the only place in the world where that's spoken. And I've heard it, I've seen it, it's fascinating, and every time I'm in Istanbul and I hear it, I'm sort of drawn to these people who describe themselves as Musevi. It's a term that describes Ottoman Jews and no other. But again, to the same point, it's a very the bus. The people that jumped on the bus who now are Turkish could have very, very different heritage, and that's a fine example of how that has worked.
That's a great example because the Jews that came, the Sephardic Jews, the Ladino speakers, who came to the Ottoman lands, was due to the Spanish who came along. They kicked all the Jews out, they kicked all the Muslims out, they only wanted Catholic Christians in the Iberian Peninsula. The Ottomans did not have any issue. The Jews are Ahli Kitab, people of the book. We respect them, we love them. There is this concept that the media is pushing out that Muslims hate Jews. There is nothing like this in our religion, and nor is our history have anything to do with this. Any kind of conflict that's happening now is political, and that's all it is. But yeah, we've had many people that have come, as you mentioned, the Sephardic Jews are one example of that. People with their kind of skewed idea of what Turkishness means. Oh, the Sultans married, they had Hürrem Sultan who was from Russia, and so what? Hürrem Sultan established waqfs, charitable associations. So for me, she's a pious Muslim. She's the mother of Sultan Selim II who took Cyprus. So they didn't have this idea that they had to prove their Turkishness, but if we look at, the actions speak louder than words. What they've contributed to us is a lot more, and if they're not going to be considered Turkish, then I don't know who will.
Yeah, and there was a great tolerance under the Ottoman period, and I think that has contributed to this mosaic of looks and ethnicities that are less apparent today, but have we been in Turkey 100 years ago, we might have seen something very, very different.
Yes.
So I wanted to move on to the question of the Uyghurs. You've mentioned them already, and I know that the Cezire Association is backing and supporting and doing its utmost to promote the plight of the Uyghur people. Could you give us a background? You've already told us about the association between the Turks and the Uyghurs. Could you tell us something about the Uyghur population now in China? How many are there? How long have they been there? And we've all seen in the press how their culture, language is being suppressed. More worryingly, now the fact that there are all sorts of very unpleasant stories coming out about moves to curb the Uyghur population in China. So anything that you can share with us, that we can share with our viewers, would be very helpful.
So firstly, we need to understand that the Uyghur people are the native people of that land. They are under occupation. So you may have heard on the news that they call it Xinjiang, for example. This is an occupier's name. It means new frontier in Chinese. So even they realize it's a new frontier. It's something that they've gone and occupied. That land, East Turkestan, they say Sharqi Turkestan in the Uyghur dialect. As we mentioned, Turkestan means land of the Turks. And if we think, it's somewhere far away from us, actually the distance from Beijing to East Turkestan, to Kashgar, is the same distance from Kashgar to North Cyprus. That's how far away it is. The people there, we think of China, there's Chinese Muslims who are in the Gansu region. They speak Mandarin. They're actually just Muslims who are Chinese. They're called the Hui. The Uyghurs are not like them. The Hui, in fact, are not getting the same level of oppression as the Uyghurs are. The Uyghurs are getting it because, yes, they're Muslim, but it's compounded by the fact that they're Turkish as well. They speak Turkish. They don't eat chicken chow mein. They don't eat dogs and pigs. They eat cow and halal meat, and they have mantu, like we do. But rather than the small one that we eat, they have large mantu. They have kebab as well. So there's a lot of similarities there because ultimately they're Turkish and they were very resistant to changing those customs. They established 2 independent republics in the 20th century. You had the Turkestan East Turkestan Islamic Republic, and then after that you just had the East Turkestan Republic, which was established. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, it's like 1948, in which the Chinese came and occupied the area. And even up to that point, they were very resistant because there was the Russians who were trying to influence them to say that, call it, you guys are Uyghur and that, but they never gave up on the idea of Turkishness. The reason I'm highlighting this isn't a nationalist rant, but these people are being oppressed in their land because they are Turkish and they're Muslim, and we are Turkish and we are Muslim, and we resisted years of oppression because we was an obstacle to the Greeks gaining enosis, which is unification with Greece. Now China is there, they've got their enosis, but these people are resisting that Chinese enosis, as it were. And for years they were under a lot of oppression. In Ramazan, many of the people who were working for the government were forced to eat in front of the Chinese governors at the time. As that oppression started to increase, there was oppression on the headscarf, people wearing beards, people were forced to eat pork. But it's only recently where we're seeing this oppression has taken a totally different level now, where I'm hearing Uyghurs are saying, we wish we had it like the Palestinians have. Because a Palestinian can go to the mosque, the Palestinian speaks Arabic, the Palestinian will wear his national costume. This is all being oppressed in East Turkestan. In fact, it's got to the point now where Chinese officials are being sent to live with in the Uyghur homes. And when obviously the men have to go and work, there's been many reports of women being raped by these Chinese people, these officials. There is anything between up to 300, we confirmed 380 concentration camps. There's more being built, where many Uyghurs are being sent there, and they say that they've been given vocational training or re-education. Actually, what's happening is there's a lot of torture there. There's evidence of gang rape, not just on the women but also on the men as well. Any Uyghur who is prominent in the community. So it's not just religious figures or people that are pushing an independent Turkestan, but we had famous singers who have gone in, even Uyghurs that were towing the line, the sellout Uyghurs that were prominent in the promoting the Chinese communist regime, even they've been arrested because they just want to completely end the Uyghur people. That their children are being taken away from them and taken to these schools to be brought up as Han Chinese, to speak Mandarin, to be loyal to the communist regime, to be denied of their heritage. And this is a crime against humanity. The Uyghurs have a incredible history. Not that it would make it any better, but they actually have contributed so much to the human culture. They have songs where they have their own makams. They have the atlas design that they have. Mahmud Kashgari, a great scholar from Kashgar in East Turkestan, he wrote a book, Divan Lugat-i-Turk, and this was written for the Abbasids who were starting to mingle with the Turks, and this whole encyclopedia of the Turkish people. And we know much about our own ancestors, the Oghuz Turkmen, thanks to the work of Mahmud Kashgari.
So the interesting thing there, and I wasn't aware of this, is you said that up until 1948, the Uyghur people in East Turkmenistan have largely been allowed and left to occupy their own lands. They've been there for generations, for centuries. It's their homeland. Mm-hmm. And the Chinese actually built the Great Wall of China to keep the Mongoloids and the Turkmen people out. What has driven this need to convert this population? I mean, do you have any idea how big the Uyghur population in China is? That's
a difficult question to answer. Official Chinese estimates are around 11 million, 12 million. The Uyghurs themselves say it's around 20 million. Some estimates go as high as 30 million, although...
Well, let's just reflect on that, because the current population of Greece is 8 million. Yeah. So we're talking about a population of Turkish people, Turkish origins, who self-define, this isn't a new breakaway culture. No. They've been there. These are their homelands, who are potentially as big as 30 million, who are being culturally oppressed by probably the most powerful and controlling regime in the world. It's a frightening thought. And I don't know if you saw the reports on ITV News. They were sort of aired at sort of the beginning of September 2020. There was a 3-part documentary, and for 3 nights the ITV News opened with 10-minute segments on stories of Uyghur people who had fled and were being interviewed from Istanbul. And some of the stories, the personal accounts, were horrendous, horrific. I mean, it's frightening to think these are the people that have broken out that can speak. Mm-hmm. What's actually happening and what's been... I know the Australian government have got sort of satellites monitoring some of the lands that we believe that the Uyghur people are being persecuted in. And there was this frightening report that said there are at least 380 camps either that have been built or in the process of being built that are re-education or assimilation camps for this community. It's a terrifying thought. My question to you, and I know that you're very active and this is an issue you're passionate about, is if we have anyone who wants to become more active, that wants to help, that wants to support, what can they do to get involved? Okay.
My advice would be you can follow the Uyghur Solidarity Campaign, which is led by an Uyghur activist, Rahima Mahmud, easily found on social media. They have had regular demonstrations recently, obviously because of the such extreme nature of the oppression that's been happening lately. There's also the UK Uyghur community as well, and you can find them on various mediums of social media. Cezire, because it doesn't quite fit in with our aims and objectives, we as individuals have been quite passionate to support them. We're not there to lead on it because they are doing a great job of it themselves, but they do need support. And it's been unfortunate when I've attended various protests of theirs, you see English communists there, and various other communities that are backing them. And other than, Cezire, the few members that came along, including myself, were the only Turkish Cypriots there.
Interesting.
And if you imagine, we mentioned like the internment camps, there's 3 million people in there. and we estimate that there's 1 million Turkish Cypriots globally, just to kind of think about the amount of the sheer number of people there, we shouldn't complain and say that no one is supporting the Turkish Cypriot cause when there's such an extreme thing happening at the moment. There's not going to be any Uyghurs left at this level in our lifetime. We need to get our voices heard, and if you think that, well, what difference is it going to make?
Now, I've also heard some quite worrying things. The fashion brand Zara has been accused, and I think it's been proven that they are using forced labour in these Uyghur camps as part of their manufacturing process. And there was a protest in Oxford Street, outside the Oxford Street store last week. Have we had any updates? What have Zara done?
If I'm not mistaken, either Zara or one other brand, I can't recall off the top of my head, have actually recalled and stopped importing from China as a result of these campaigns. So it does work. I mean, some sort of pressure there. Okay, it's not going to stop it completely, but the Chinese government does actually take these kind of things seriously. They're very, they want to keep their image pristine as well, even though they're doing all these acts. I mean, TikTok, which is a Chinese social media platform, they've been very careful. There was an Afghan girl, I think she was a British Afghan, and she has a channel about like beauty and makeup and such, and she put up a video about the Uyghurs, and it went down. And she kept trying, and it kept coming down again. So what she did is that she had a makeup tutorial, and in the middle of it she had a bit about the Uyghurs, and when it got caught on, they took it down. But it was fortunate to start doing getting very popular across other mediums, but it just shows that the Chinese are very careful. They actually have teams, paid members of Chinese staff, who are going around and commenting on social media and trying to divert the narrative from the actual truth of what's happening there.
Mustafa, there's another part of Cyprus's Islamic history that I'd like to ask you about. Some people may have not heard of this person, and other people believe he has a bit of a cult following, and that is the story behind Sheikh Nazım. And I heard his name in Turkey for the first time when I told people that I had Turkish Cypriot heritage. They said, "Oh, you know, we're followers of Sheikh Nazım." I knew nothing about him at the time. I've come to learn a little bit, but I'd like to know what your take is on the history and what he's brought to Cyprus's Islamic history.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Sheikh Nazım arguably is the most famous Turkish Cypriot globally. Perhaps the Turkish Cypriot community isn't as aware of him, but globally his presence has been felt all over the world, from South America, North America, all over the world. He's Larnakalı, he's from Larnaka originally. His grandfather is also very famous. His grandfather, Kaytazade Nazım Efendi, a very famous poet, and he's written books as well, and he was very regular in contributing to the newspapers of the time. He himself, Sheikh, literally means old man, but in this context it means that he is the leader, or he's been given ijazet, he's been given the qualification or permission to lead a tarikat, as they say in Turkish, which is, we can call a religious order, we can say. And we mentioned about Cyprus's Islamic history. Traditionally, the Turkish Cypriots have been a very religious community, a highly religious community, up until like the 1930s. And up until that point, these tarikats played a very critical part in Turkish Cypriot life. And so you had the Naqshbandi, you had the Mevlevi, and various other tarikats as well. But these two were the most prominent of these tarikats. And what the tarikat aims to do, it's not something that Muslims have to join per se. You won't find mention of tarikat in like the Quran or the Hadith corpuses. It's something in which people who want to go above and beyond, so you've done your 5 prayers and you do all the kind of 5 pillars of Islam as well, but the tariqat aims to discipline, give that person self-discipline, terbiyah. So they'll give them extra zikr, so remembrance of Allah and supplications to remember. They will follow a more strict lifestyle where their whole life is dedicated to praying and serving the community as well. And Sheikh Nazım's religious order is what they call Naqshbandi Haqqani, which is specific. The Haqqani element is specific to him. There's Naqshbandi in various countries, including in Turkey, but the one unique to Cyprus is a Naqshbandi Haqqani. It's the only religious order left in Cyprus now. So in many ways he is continuing that culture of tariqat in Cyprus. He later was based in Lefke. We had a dergah, which is like the camp of the religious order, we can say. His legacy, I mean, he was very close with the administration at the time. He was very close with Rauf Denktaş, Fazıl Küçük. In fact, when briefly the ezan had been changed to the Turkish language up until Adnan Menderes, Sheikh Nazım took a stand against that, and he would go around to the various villages and recite the ezan in Arabic as well. So he's quite, we can say, he's an activist. He's quite a dominant figure in that regards. But we can say his legacy, if we can say, is that there have been many people that have converted to Islam through his hand. And if you go to Lefke to this day, where his son now has taken over as the Sheikh Mehmet Efendi, to this day you can see Germans and Malaysians and various people from all over the world dressing up with shalwar and turbans and brightly coloured costumes. And this is testament to his character and the way he presented Islam, which was in a way that is certain segments, maybe more of the hippie kind of communities, were able to appreciate. If we look at it from a purely TRNC or Turkish Cypriot promotion perspective, I think this is one thing where our tourism board or us as NGOs or people who are lobbying often neglect. And again, we shouldn't look at things through a purely spiritual lens. If we look at it from what is going to promote our cause as well, this man is getting people from all around the world to come to a village in northern Cyprus. So he's really done a lot of work to promote North Cyprus as a result of his propagation of his version of Islam.
So how many people, sort of pre-COVID, do you think, or would you guess, were visiting Cyprus every year to pay pilgrimage to the dergah in Lefke?
I wouldn't know the figures, to be honest with you. I mean, I wouldn't say they go for homage. They go to gain that terbiyeh, to gain a spiritual uplifting. And that's happening on our doorstep. So that's just amazing.
When did he pass away?
He passed away through natural reasons. He was a very old man when he passed away.
And how long ago was that?
I can't remember the exact date now, but it's not too long ago, maybe about 5 years ago or so. And now his son has taken over, and there's a global following still of this tariqat, which is based in Lefke.
Amazing. I think if anyone wants to find out more about Sheikh Nazım and his particular take on Islam, they can probably look it up online and find out some more information. Presumably it's available in English as well. Yes,
there's many works in English and which have been translated. For those who are in London, in Tottenham you have the St. Anne's, what was previously a church.
Yes.
Turkish Cypriots came along and turned the church into a mosque. So it just goes to show when we put our minds to something, be it religion or whatever it may be, we can achieve great things.
And is there a mosque in London dedicated to Sheikh Nazım and his followers?
Yes, so the one I mentioned in St. Anne's Road is dedicated to Sheikh Nazım, and the imams follow his understanding of Islam, and they were what they called murids of Sheikh Nazım. There's also one in South London as well. But just to clarify, I mean, Cezire is not associated with this tariqat, and none of the members, including myself, we haven't given allegiance to this order. But it's very interesting, and I would advise Turkish Cypriots that we should look into it, because it's contributed so much to raising the awareness of our people.
Absolutely. It's obviously a name that I've heard. Never in Cyprus and never by a Turkish Cypriot. I've only ever heard him referenced in Turkey, but that's been enormously helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
The information you've given us on Uyghur, I think, has been very helpful to our community. It would be really helpful if you are aware of any protests, of any campaigns, of anything that we can become involved in. Please share them with the CTCA, and we'll happily host them on our Facebook page, on our groups, and on our homepage as well. Thank you very much, Mustafa.
Thanks for having me.
For everyone watching us, thank you very much for taking the time to join this programme of The Voice of Diaspora. Hoping to see you again next time.